My sister told our parents I dropped out of medical school, a lie that got me cut off for 6 years. They did not attend my residency graduation or my wedding. Last month, my sister was rushed to the ER. When her attending physician walked in, my mom grabbed Dad's arm so hard it left bruises. I am Camille, 32 years old, and my family threw me away to protect their golden child. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. The emergency department at Johns Hopkins Hospital is a war zone on a Friday night. It is a chaotic symphony of blaring monitors, rushing footsteps, and the sharp scent of antiseptic mixed with copper. I was reviewing charts at the central station when the double doors burst open. Paramedics sprinted through, pushing a blood-stained gurney. On it lay a woman clinging to life after a horrific car crash. Her face was severely bruised and covered in deep lacerations, but I would recognize those high cheekbones anywhere. It was Dominique, my older sister, the golden child of the Sterling family, the woman who systematically destroyed my relationship with my parents to fund her own lavish lifestyle. I barely had time to process her arrival before the waiting room doors flew open with explosive force. In rushed my parents, Marcus and Valerie, looking like they stepped straight out of a high society gala and into a nightmare. My mother wore a silk designer gown, her perfectly coiffed hair flying wildly around her panicked face. My father was dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo. They completely ignored the strict protocols of the emergency room, violently shoving their way past bleeding patients and exhausted families. My mother marched directly up to the triage desk, slamming her manicured hands down on the counter. The triage nurses, two hard-working black women trying to manage a crowded waiting room, looked up in absolute shock. My mother did not ask for help. She aggressively demanded it. She pulled a black metal elite country club membership card from her designer purse and practically threw it at the glass partition. She started screaming that she was a platinum donor to the hospital network, though I knew they had not donated a single dime in years. "Do you know who we are?" My mother shrieked, her voice cutting through the noise of the trauma center. "My daughter is back there. She is a Spelman alumni. She is a prominent society wife in this city. She belongs in a private VIP suite, not out here with this public hospital trash. Get me the chief of surgery right now. Do you hear me? I want the best doctor in this building attending to her immediately." Before the head nurse could call for security, another loud voice joined the chaos. Preston, Dominique's arrogant husband, shoved his way to the front desk. Preston was the shiny trophy my parents always wanted, a wealthy white man from a prominent real estate family. They believed his mere presence in our family elevated their status in the eyes of their elite circles. He stood there with his chest puffed out, his face red with furious entitlement. He jabbed his finger aggressively toward the glass, his voice dripping with intense condescension. "Listen to me very carefully," he barked at the nurses. "You are going to stop whatever meaningless paperwork you are doing and get us a private room. If my wife does not receive white glove service in the next 30 seconds, my family's lawyers will own this entire hospital by morning. I will have all of your jobs. I will make sure none of you ever work in medicine again." His blatant disrespect was sickening, but what disgusted me more was my parents' reaction. Instead of checking their son-in-law for his atrocious behavior, Marcus and Valerie nodded along, vigorously validating his pathetic threats. They had spent their entire lives climbing the social ladder, stepping on anyone who got in their way, including me, just to maintain their proximity to power and wealth. They were perfectly willing to humiliate hardworking people of their own community just to appease Preston's fragile ego. I stood in the dark shadow of the trauma bay hallway, quietly listening to their dramatic tirade. For 6 long years, I had built my successful life without their help. When they abruptly cut me off, leaving me homeless and drowning in massive student debt because of Dominique's vicious lies, I did not break. I worked grueling overnight shifts, studied until my eyes bled, and earned every single prestigious credential attached to my name. I survived their cruel abandonment, and now fate had brought them directly to my territory. I took a deep breath, adjusted the surgical mask hanging around my neck, and smoothed the front of my blue scrubs. I pushed the heavy double doors of the surgical suite open and stepped out into the harsh fluorescent light of the waiting area. The heavy thud of the doors swinging shut caught their immediate attention. My mother turned her head sharply, ready to unleash another volley of insults. Her eyes landed on me. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like she had seen a ghost. She gasped a sharp, ragged sound and grabbed my father's arm with such terrifying force that I could see her manicured nails digging deep into his tailored suit jacket, leaving visible bruises. Preston, completely oblivious to this, demanded I fetch the real doctor. I walked slowly toward the triage desk, stopping right behind the yellow line. I tapped the badge on my chest. "I am the chief of trauma surgery," I said coldly. "Step back behind that yellow line now, or I will have security forcefully remove all three of you from my hospital." The surgical doors swung shut, cutting off my mother's gasp. I did not look back. My focus shifted instantly to the sterile environment of Trauma Bay 1. The air inside smelled of iodine and urgency. I stepped up to the scrub sink, letting scalding water rush over my hands. Through the glass partition, I could see the trauma team hovering over Dominique. Her designer dress was cut away, revealing severe bruising and a compound fracture. This was the woman who had orchestrated my exile from the Sterling family. 6 years ago, she watched them throw me out, crying crocodile tears. Now her life was entirely in my hands. I backed through the operating room doors, holding my sterile hands up. A scrub nurse immediately gowned and gloved me. I stepped up to the operating table and looked down at my sister. The monitors beeped in a frantic, erratic rhythm, indicating massive internal bleeding. "We need to open her up right now," I ordered, my voice calm and steady. Scalpel. The room moved in perfect, synchronized harmony. Despite the boiling anger in my chest, my hands did not shake. Years of grueling surgical training took over, overriding any personal vendetta I made. The initial incision making sure it was as clean and precise as possible. I was not going to let my sister die today. Death would be too easy an escape for someone who had caused so much destruction. I needed her to live, so she could finally face the consequences of her actions. "Suction," I called out, navigating through the pooling blood to locate the ruptured spleen. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Evans, stood by the monitors, monitoring her rapidly dropping blood pressure. "Dr. Sterling, we are pushing 2 units of O-negative blood," he announced. "I am pulling up her intake chart now to verify her medical history and insurance status before we transfer her to the intensive care unit." "Go ahead," I said, clamping a major artery to stem the bleeding. Evans tapped on his keyboard, reading the information aloud for the surgical record. "Patient is listed as a premium VIP tier member. Her insurance is fully covered under a high-level medical professional plan." "That is strange." He paused, frowning at the screen. "What is strange?" I asked, keeping my eyes focused on repairing the splenic tear. "The insurance portal is throwing a red flag," he explained. "It says the patient is registered under a platinum policy, typically reserved for active licensed physicians. It even lists a national medical provider identifier and a social security number, verifying her status as a high-earning medical professional." He rattled off the 9-digit social security number and the specific medical license code attached to the VIP file. My hands froze mid-stitch. The operating room went dead silent, except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. I knew those exact identification numbers perfectly. I knew them because I had memorized them the day I graduated from medical school. They were my numbers, my very own social security number, my own hard-earned medical license. "Is there a problem, Dr. Sterling?" the scrub nurse asked. Noticing my sudden hesitation, I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my hands to resume their precise movements. "No problem," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Just a massive fraud." Dr. Evans looked confused. "Fraud? What do you mean?" I tied off the final suture and stepped back, letting the assisting surgeon take over, closing the incision. "I mean that the woman lying on this table is my sister," I explained, pulling off my bloody gloves, and she is currently committing federal identity theft. That VIP insurance policy and that medical license belong to me. The entire surgical team stared at me in stunned disbelief. But the intake form says she is a wealthy medical investor with a massive trust fund. Evans stammered, looking back at the screen. A trust fund? I laughed bitterly, the sound echoing harshly against the sterile tile walls. Let me tell you about that trust fund. 6 years ago, my parents cut me off without a single penny because this woman lying here convinced them I was a disgrace. I did not have a trust fund. I had to work 3 grueling jobs just to pay my medical school tuition. I cleaned bedpans at a nursing home on weekends. I tutored privileged college kids until midnight. I worked the graveyard shift at a 24-hour diner just to afford my textbooks. I starved and exhausted myself for years to earn the medical license she is casually using to get a private hospital suite. She ruined my life to steal my resources, and now she was stealing my identity to maintain her fake lifestyle. My parents threw me away to protect a felon. I threw my soiled surgical gown into the bin and scrubbed my hands a second time, washing away her blood. The surgery was a complete success. She was stable and would survive to face justice. I grabbed the patient intake clipboard from the charting station, holding the physical proof of her crime in my hand. I pushed through the operating doors and marched toward the waiting area. My parents in Preston were aggressively harassing the administration about VIP demands. They stopped complaining, seeing my dark, uncompromising expression. My mother opened her mouth to complain, but I cut her off. I tossed the clipboard onto the table in front of Marcus. The loud clatter made all 3 of them jump. "She will live," I said, my voice coldly echoing. The surgery was flawless, but you 3 have a much bigger problem right now. My father looked at the clipboard in confusion. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, trying to maintain his authoritative tone. "Federal crimes, Dad," I replied. "Why is your precious golden child daughter currently using my active medical license and my personal social security number to secure her fake VIP health insurance?" The waiting room fell into a suffocating silence. My mother stared at the clipboard I had just thrown onto the table, her perfectly lined lips parted in shock. For a fraction of a second, the carefully constructed mask of the elite society matriarch slipped, revealing the terrified, calculating woman underneath. But Valerie Sterling had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of denial. She quickly recovered, her eyes darting nervously around the waiting area to see if any of the other patients or nurses had overheard my accusation. She reached out with a trembling hand and snatched the clipboard off the table, holding it tightly against her chest, as if she could physically hide the felony written on those pages. "Camille, lower your voice right now," my mother hissed, stepping closer to me and forcing a tight, artificial smile for the benefit of the onlookers. "You are making an absolute fool of yourself over a simple clerical error. The administration desk must have mixed up the files. Dominique would never do something so reckless. Just go back into the system and fix it quietly. We have a reputation to maintain in this city, and I will not have you starting baseless rumors just because you are still bitter about the past." A clerical error. I repeated, my voice steady and completely devoid of the hushed panic she was trying to force on me. A clerical error does not accidentally input a 9-digit social security number and a specific state medical board license code. A clerical error does not magically upgrade a patient to a platinum-tier healthcare plan reserved strictly for licensed physicians. She memorized my credentials. She deliberately provided them to the paramedics to ensure she got VIP treatment. This is not a mistake, Mom. This is a federal crime. My father, Marcus, finally found his voice. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, though I could see a bead of sweat forming on his forehead. "Now listen here, Camille." He started attempting to use the deep, authoritative tone that used to terrify me when I was a child. "Your sister just survived a massive trauma. This is not the time to be petty about paperwork. You are the chief of surgery here. You have the power to make this go away. We will handle whatever hospital bills are required out of pocket, but you will delete that file and process her under her own name immediately. We protect this family first." Before I could tell my father exactly where he could shove his family protection plan, Preston pushed his way between my parents. He glared at me with pure, unfiltered disdain. His face was flushed red, and the veins in his neck were bulging. He clearly had no idea how hospital administration worked, nor did he care. To him, I was just an obstacle and nuisance standing in the way of his entitlement. "You know what your problem is?" Preston sneered, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "You think because you got some fancy title in a public hospital that you are untouchable. You are a glorified diversity hire playing doctor. Dominique told me exactly what kind of bitter, jealous person you are. You could not handle the fact that she married into old money while you had nothing, so now you are trying to frame her for some ridiculous insurance mix-up." He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a heavy metal American Express Platinum card. He did not hand it to me. He turned and aggressively threw it onto the counter right in front of the billing clerk who had been quietly standing behind the glass partition, listening to the entire exchange. "Swipe the card," Preston commanded the clerk, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Put my wife in the best private recovery suite this dump has to offer. Whatever the cost is, just charge it. My family could buy this entire hospital wing out of petty cash if we wanted to, just to shut her up." The billing clerk, a stern older woman who had seen every type of entitlement come through those doors, did not flinch. She picked up the heavy metal card without a word, typed the emergency trauma surgery codes into her computer, and swiped it through the machine. The machine beeped once. A bright red error message flashed across her screen. "Declined," the clerk stated loudly, handing the card back over the counter. Preston froze. His arrogant smirk completely vanished. "Excuse me," he snapped, his voice rising in pitch. "Your machine is clearly broken. That card has no limit. Run it again manually." The clerk typed the numbers in manually and hit enter. The machine beeped again. "Still declined, sir. The bank is stating the account has been frozen due to insufficient funds." Preston looked like he had been slapped across the face. He whirled around, his eyes frantically searching for an out. He lunged toward my father, violently snatching the black leather wallet right out of Marcus's hands. "What are you doing?" my father yelled, stumbling backward. Preston ignored him, pulling out my father's elite banking card and slamming it onto the counter. "Use this one," Preston demanded. My father lunged forward, his face draining of all color. "Wait, do not swipe that," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with genuine, unadulterated panic. But the clerk had already swiped it. The machine beeped for the third time. "Declined," the clerk announced. The silence that followed was deafening. Preston slowly turned to look at my father, his eyes wide with confusion. Marcus was shaking. He looked at my mother, whose pristine facade was finally cracking into pieces. The grand illusion they had sold to the world was falling apart right in front of my eyes. My parents had always portrayed themselves as the pinnacle of Black elite society, dripping in generational wealth. But Marcus's sudden absolute terror told me a completely different story. They were broke. They had been secretly draining their own accounts, destroying their own wealth for years, just to fund Dominique and Preston's lavish fake lifestyle. They sacrificed their own financial stability to keep up the appearance that their golden child had married a billionaire. In reality, Preston was bleeding them dry and they had nothing left to give. The billing clerk cleared her throat, breaking the heavy tension in the room. "Sir, the total for the emergency trauma surgery, the blood transfusions, and the intensive care unit prep comes to exactly $150,000. Since the cards are declining and the insurance file is currently under review for identity theft, we require this payment up front before she can be transferred to a recovery suite. $150,000. The number hung in the air like a guillotine. Preston turned back to me, the arrogance completely wiped from his face. He suddenly looked small, desperate, and pathetic. He swallowed hard, trying to force a conciliatory smile. "Camille, look," he stammered, his voice entirely stripped of its former bravado. "We got off on the wrong foot here. We are family. Dominique is your sister. You are the chief of surgery. You have the authority to waive these fees, right? Just do this one favor for us as a family favor, and we will forget all about this insurance misunderstanding." I looked at the man who had just called me a diversity hire. I looked at the parents who had thrown me onto the streets 6 years ago to protect the very sister who was currently stealing my identity. I smiled warmly, leaning closer to Preston so he could hear every single syllable clearly. I do not waive fees for identity thieves. The silence in the waiting room was shattered by the sound of my pager. It was the recovery room. Dominique was waking up. I left my stunned parents and furious brother-in-law by the billing desk and walked down the sterile corridor. When I pushed open the doors, the bright fluorescent lights illuminated my sister's pale face. The anesthesia was wearing off, and she was groggy, blinking against the harsh glare. Her eyes darted around the room before landing on me. Instantly, the confusion in her eyes vanished, replaced by a calculated, venomous panic. She did not ask how her surgery went or if she was going to be okay. Instead, as my parents and Preston rushed into the room right behind me, Dominique began to wail. "Mom," she sobbed, throwing her head back against the hospital pillows. Her voice was weak but perfectly pitched for maximum theatrical effect. "She did this to me. Camille did this on purpose. She deliberately botched my surgery because she hates me. She wants to ruin my life." My mother did not even hesitate. She did not question the absurdity of a patient waking up from a perfectly executed trauma surgery and instantly claiming malpractice. Valerie Sterling operated on blind favoritism, and her golden child had just blown the dog whistle. My mother lunged forward, placing her body between my sister and me. "You vindictive, jealous little girl!" My mother screamed, her voice echoing off the medical equipment. "You have always been jealous of Dominique. Always. She has the perfect husband, the perfect life, the perfect social standing. That is why you dropped out of medical school and brought shame to our entire lineage. You could not handle the pressure, so you threw your future away and disgraced us. And now you are trying to punish your sister." I stood there letting her hateful words wash over me. 6 years ago, I would have cried, begged for them to believe me, and desperately tried to prove my innocence. But the scared young girl they threw out onto the street was dead. She died during those sleepless nights working at the diner and studying biochemistry in the back of a freezing bus. The woman standing in front of them now was the chief of trauma surgery, and I was entirely out of patience. I reached into my lab coat pocket and pulled out my hospital-issued tablet. I did not yell or cry. I simply tapped the screen, logged into my secure university portal, and pulled up my official academic records. "I never dropped out of medical school, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I turned the tablet around and shoved it directly in front of her face. "Look at the screen. Read it out loud. Those are my official unbroken transcripts from the day I started to the day I graduated at the very top of my class. I never failed a single course. I never missed a single clinical rotation. I was never placed on academic probation." My mother stared at the glowing screen. Her eyes scanned the perfect grades, the continuous enrollment dates, the dean's list commendations. Her jaw trembled as she processed the irrefutable digital proof right in front of her. "But we received a letter," my father stammered, moving closer to look at the screen over her shoulder. "The dean of admissions sent us a formal letter stating you had withdrawn." "Dominique found the mail," I repeated mockingly. How incredibly convenient. Dominique forged that withdrawal letter on fake university letterhead. Dominique intercepted my mail. She concocted that entire disgusting lie about me being an addict because she knew you two were too obsessed with your pristine society image to ever verify the facts. She orchestrated my exile so she could get exactly what she wanted. My mother slowly lowered the tablet. "What are you talking about? Why would Dominique do something so malicious? She had no reason to lie about you." I turned my gaze to my sister, who was now pressing herself deep into the hospital mattress, trying to physically shrink away from the absolute truth coming her way. Because of the medical school trust fund, I stated clearly, letting every word hang heavy in the quiet recovery room. Grandfather left me exactly $200,000 specifically designated for my medical school tuition. It was locked in a trust that only you and Dad could authorize for release. But if I dropped out, that money defaulted back to the general family estate, an estate that Dominique desperately needed to raid. I pointed a finger at Preston, who was standing near the door with his arms crossed. Tell them, Dominique. Tell them why you needed my $200,000 so badly. Tell them how you drained my entire future just to pay for your extravagant destination wedding to this man. You stole my tuition money to buy designer flower arrangements and imported champagne so you could impress his wealthy white family and secure your position in high society. The air in the room was sucked out completely. My mother staggered backward, covering her mouth with her hands. My father looked at his golden child in sheer horror. They had thrown me out and spent 6 years hating me, all based on a malicious lie designed to fund a wedding party. They looked at Dominique, waiting for her to deny it, but she just laid there, trapped and exposed. Suddenly, the tense silence was broken by a sound that made all our blood run cold. It was not a gasp or a cry. It was laughter. Deep, booming, malicious laughter coming from the doorway. We all turned. Preston was leaning against the wall, laughing so incredibly hard that he had to wipe a tear from his eye. He clapped his hands slowly in a mocking, rhythmic applause. His arrogant face twisted into a predatory smile. He looked completely unaffected by the emotional destruction happening in front of him. Preston pushed himself off the wall and strolled into the center of the recovery room. His booming laughter faded into a sharp, cruel chuckle. He looked down at Dominique not with the concern of a loving husband, but with the cold calculation of an auditor examining a bad investment. "You really are a piece of work, Dominique," he sneered, shaking his head. "I knew your family was desperate to cling to my coattails, but I did not realize you were literally stealing your sister's identity just to afford the entry fee, a fake trust fund, and a fake medical license. You are nothing but a cheap fraud." Dominique reached out with a trembling hand, her face pale with fresh terror. "Preston, honey, please," she whimpered. "It is not what it looks like. I did it for us. I did it so we could have the perfect life together." Preston slapped her hand away so forcefully that the intravenous line attached to her wrist violently shook. "Do not touch me," he snarled. "There is no us anymore. I married a society woman with a clean pedigree, not a common street thief facing federal charges. I am calling my lawyers the second I step out of this miserable public hospital. I am filing for divorce today. You can rot in a jail cell for all I care, but I am absolutely not paying a single cent of your $150,000 medical bill. You are completely on your own." The monitor beside Dominique's bed began to beep frantically as her heart rate skyrocketed. The reality of losing her wealthy white husband and her elite status hit her harder than the physical trauma of the car crash. She tried to sit up, fighting against the post-surgical pain, her eyes wide and wild with absolute desperation. She knew that without Preston she was nothing. Her entire identity was built on his money and his name. "No, you cannot leave me, Preston!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You cannot divorce me! I am pregnant!" The room stood completely still. My parents gasped in unison. "I am carrying your child." "Preston," she sobbed, clutching her stomach through the thin hospital blanket. "I am pregnant with the Sterling family heir. You cannot abandon your own flesh and blood. Think about our baby. Think about your family's legacy. If you leave me now, the scandal will ruin your reputation. You have to stay and you have to protect me." The mention of a wealthy, half-white grandchild was like a magic spell cast over my parents. In a fraction of a second, they completely forgot that Dominique had just been exposed for ruining my life, forging academic documents, and stealing my $200,000 medical school trust fund. They forgot all the pain and suffering she had intentionally inflicted on me for 6 grueling years. The prospect of being permanently tied to the Sterling family fortune erased every ounce of their temporary moral outrage. Valerie rushed to Dominique's bedside, hovering over her golden child with renewed, ferocious protective energy. "A baby," my mother gasped, tears of joy springing to her eyes. "Marcus, did you hear that we are going to have a Sterling grandchild? Our bloodline is going to be cemented in the highest tier of society." Marcus straightened his suit jacket, his posture shifting back to arrogant authority. He turned his back on Dominique and marched directly up to me. His eyes were hard and uncompromising. Camille, you need to listen to me very carefully, he ordered, his voice tight with desperation. You are going to delete that insurance file right now. You are going to absorb this hospital bill, and you are not going to say a single word to the police about any of this. I stared at him, sickened to my very core. She stole my future dad. I said, my voice dangerously low. She left me homeless and starving. She stole $200,000 from me, and you want me to just take the hit and pay her hospital bills so she can keep playing pretend. You survived, did you not? My mother snapped, turning around to glare at me. Look at you. You are the chief of surgery. You are fine. Dominique is carrying the heir to a real estate empire. Do you have any idea what this means for our family name? This child is our ticket to generational wealth and untouchable social status. Your 20s were a small price to pay for the greater good of this family. You need to swallow your petty jealousy and protect your sister. If Preston leaves her because of your little investigation, you will be destroying your own nephew's future. Preston looked torn. The mention of an heir had clearly struck a nerve, tapping into his own arrogant obsession with his family's legacy. He stared at Dominique, his jaw clenched, weighing the scandal of a messy divorce against the scandal of a criminal wife. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply turned my back on my parents and walked over to the vital signs monitor mounted on the wall next to Dominique's bed. I tapped the screen, pulling up the comprehensive blood panel and toxicology report that had been drawn the second she was wheeled into the trauma bay an hour ago. The results were displayed in stark, unarguable digital text. I turned to face the room, folding my arms across my chest. My voice was calm, carrying the chilling authority of a physician delivering a terminal diagnosis. You are not pregnant, Dominique, I announced, letting the words echo in the sterile room. I ran a full trauma blood panel on you before we went into the operating room. Your human chorionic gonadotropin levels are absolute zero. There is no baby. There is no sterling family heir. Dominique's face went completely ashen. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. My parents froze, their dreams of elite generational wealth evaporating into thin air. But I did find something else very interesting in your blood work. I continued, tapping the screen one more time to enlarge the toxicology results. You are not carrying a child, Dominique, but you do have lethal amounts of illicit narcotics in your system. The sterile walls of the recovery room seemed to close in on Dominique as my words hung in the air. Lethal amounts of illicit narcotics. The phrase echoed over the rhythmic beeping of her heart monitor. Dominique looked wildly at the glowing screen, as if willing the toxicology report to disappear. My parents stood completely frozen. Their dreams of a wealthy, half-white grandchild had just been replaced by the terrifying reality of a felony drug charge. Preston stepped back from the hospital bed. The look of disgust on his face was absolute. He looked at Dominique not as his wife, but as a contagious disease he needed to escape immediately. Before my mother could launch into another desperate attempt to excuse her golden child, the recovery room doors swung open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. Their heavy boots thudded against the linoleum floor, cutting through the thick tension in the room. They carried official clipboards and stern expressions. We are looking for the family of Dominique Sterling, the taller officer announced. We need to take an official statement regarding the single-vehicle collision on Interstate 95. Preston did not even hesitate. He saw his golden opportunity to sever ties, and he took it with the practiced ease of a man who had never faced a consequence in his life. He smoothed the lapels of his expensive tailored jacket and marched right up to the officers. I am her husband, he said, his voice suddenly dropping into a tone of deep, practiced sorrow. Officers, I am so glad you are here. It was an absolute nightmare. My wife has been battling a severe substance abuse problem. I tried to get her help, but tonight she completely lost her mind. She stole the keys to my Tesla while she was heavily intoxicated. I got into the passenger seat to try and stop her, but she sped off. She was driving recklessly and crashed us straight into the concrete barrier. I am lucky to be alive. I watched him deliver this flawless performance and felt a surge of pure disgust. Preston possessed a chilling sense of entitlement. He confidently believed that his status as a wealthy white man would grant him instant credibility. He assumed the legal system would automatically side with him over a black woman, even if that woman was his own wife. He weaponized his privilege without a second thought, painting himself as the innocent, traumatized victim while casually throwing Dominique to the wolves. Dominique sobbed hysterically from her bed. "Preston, you are lying!" she choked out, fighting against her pain medication. "Mom, tell them he is lying." I was not driving. He was driving. But my parents did not defend her. Instead, they went into a blind panic about their social standing. The idea of the black elite society discovering their daughter was a drug addict involved in a high-profile police investigation terrified them more than anything else. Marcus immediately reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his leather checkbook. Valerie stepped forward, blocking the police officers from looking at Dominique. "Officers, please, let us handle this privately," Valerie pleaded, flashing a desperate, artificial smile. "Our family is incredibly prominent in this city. We sit on several hospital boards and charity committees. A drug charge would completely ruin our flawless reputation. We are more than willing to make a very generous donation to the Police Benevolent Fund right now if we can just keep the narcotics out of the official police report." Marcus clicked his expensive pen, ready to write whatever amount was necessary to buy their way out of reality. The officers looked at my parents with complete disbelief. "You cannot bribe us to alter a police report," the taller officer stated, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio. There was a major collision. The vehicle was totaled. "We need the facts." Preston stood behind the officers, smiling smugly at my parents' pathetic display. He knew Marcus and Valerie were too cowardly to accuse him of anything because they worshipped his old money pedigree. They would rather try to bribe a police officer and risk prison than dare to point a finger at the wealthy white man who had infiltrated their family. They were actively choosing to let Preston destroy their daughter just to preserve their proximity to his status. I had seen enough. The sheer level of toxicity and cowardice in this room was suffocating. I walked over to the charting station and picked up my hospital-issued tablet. I tapped the screen, opening a secure file that the emergency medical technicians had uploaded when they brought Dominique into the trauma bay. "Put your checkbook away, Dad," I said, my voice slicing through their pathetic negotiations. "You cannot buy your way out of this one. And Preston, you should really stop talking before you add perjury to your growing list of federal crimes." Preston scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Stay out of this, Camille. You are just a doctor. Leave the legal matters to the adults." I walked directly up to the police officers and handed them the tablet. "The paramedics who pulled your wife from the wreckage are thorough," I explained, maintaining my icy professional tone. "When a smart car like a Tesla is involved in a severe trauma accident, they automatically pull the localized dashcam footage and the internal cabin footage to determine the mechanism of injury. It helps us know exactly how the patient's bodies were thrown during the impact, so we can treat their internal bleeding faster." They uploaded the high-definition video directly to her medical file 10 minutes ago. Preston suddenly stopped smiling. The blood drained from his face as he realized exactly what I was saying. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the tablet out of the officer's hands. "Give me that," he demanded, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "That is my private property. You do not have a warrant for that." The taller officer easily blocked Preston, stepping back to hit play on the screen. The high-definition video filled the quiet room with crisp, clear audio. Everyone watched as the internal cabin camera showed Preston sitting in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He was wildly erratic, clearly heavily under the influence of narcotics. Dominique was slumped unconscious in the passenger seat beside him, completely unresponsive. The video showed the car swerving violently before smashing directly into the concrete barrier. The airbags deployed with a loud bang. Then the footage showed Preston shaking off the impact. Instead of checking if his wife was alive, he unbuckled his seatbelt. He climbed over the center console, dragged a bleeding, unconscious Dominique out of the passenger seat, and shoved her forcefully behind the steering wheel. He then crawled into the passenger seat and called emergency services, playing the role of the terrified victim. The video ended. The silence in the recovery room was absolute and devastating. I looked at Preston, who was now trembling uncontrollably. I smiled, a warm, chilling smile. As you can clearly see, Officer Preston was the one driving high, crashing the car, and then dragging his bleeding, unconscious wife into the driver's seat to take the fall. I turned my gaze to my horrified parents. Now who wants to write that donation check? The taller police officer did not wait for a response. He unclipped the handcuffs from his belt with a sharp metallic clack that echoed through the recovery room. He stepped directly toward Preston, grabbing his tailored shoulder and spinning him around. Preston Sterling, you are under arrest for driving under the influence, reckless endangerment, leaving the scene of an accident, and filing a false police report. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use that right, I added, watching Preston struggle against the officer's iron grip. It is the smartest thing you could possibly do right now. Preston did not remain silent. The moment the cold steel of the handcuffs locked around his wrists, his carefully crafted facade completely disintegrated. He morphed into a cornered feral animal. His face flushed a violent shade of crimson, and the sheer entitlement he had been raised on boiled over into pure, unadulterated venom. He began screaming, thrashing against the two officers who were forced to physically restrain him against the medical supply cart, sending plastic syringes clattering to the floor. "Get your filthy hands off me," Preston roared, his voice cracking with uncontrollable rage. "You cannot arrest me. I am a Sterling. My family owns half this city. You are making the biggest mistake of your pathetic blue-collar lives." When the officers ignored his entitled tantrum and began reading the rest of his Miranda rights, Preston turned his furious gaze toward me and my parents. The mask was fully off now. He unleashed a torrent of vile, unforgivable racial slurs. He called me a diversity quota, claiming I belonged in a ghetto clinic rather than running a world-class trauma center. He turned to my mother and father and spat the most degrading racist insults imaginable directly in their faces. He told them they were nothing but desperate, pathetic trash, trying to buy their way into his elite white world, and that they should be on their knees thanking him for even looking at their daughter. The sheer venom of his words should have been the ultimate wake-up call. It should have been the moment my parents finally snapped out of their lifelong delusion. Any normal father would have thrown a punch to defend his family. Any normal mother would have slapped the man who just called her a racial slur and tried to send her bleeding daughter to federal prison. But Marcus and Valerie were social climbers infected with a deep-seated toxic obsession with white proximity. They genuinely believed that aligning themselves with old white money was the only way to validate their existence. Instead of defending their dignity, my parents reacted with a display of cowardice so pathetic it made my stomach turn. Marcus actually took a step toward the police officers, raising his hands in a desperate, placating gesture. "Officers, please let us just calm down!" My father begged, his voice shaking with absolute desperation. Preston is just in shock. He hit his head in the accident. He does not mean what he is saying. We can sort this out without an arrest. Please do not put him in handcuffs. It will ruin his brilliant career and stain his family name. Valerie rushed to my side, grabbing my arm with frantic, trembling fingers. "Camille, delete the video," she demanded, her eyes wide with absolute blind panic. "Delete the video from the hospital server right now. If Preston goes to jail, his father will destroy us. He will cut Dominique off without a penny. You have to get rid of the evidence before they take him to the precinct." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling completely disgusted. I yanked my arm out of her grasp. "Are you out of your mind?" I asked, my voice dripping with pure contempt. "Did you not just hear the slurs he called you? Did you not just watch a high-definition video of him dragging your bleeding unconscious daughter into the driver's seat so she would take the fall for his felony? And you are begging me to destroy evidence to save him. You do not understand how this world works," Valerie shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "The Sterling family has power we could only dream of. If we turn on Preston, we lose everything. We lose the country club. We lose the investment accounts. We lose our status. Dominique can survive a misunderstanding with the police, but we cannot survive making an enemy out of the Sterling Empire. Delete the footage, Camille. Your internalized racism is a sickness," I stated flatly, staring them down. You are literally bowing to a man who just called you a racial slur because you are so terrified of losing your proximity to his white wealth. You threw me onto the streets 6 years ago to protect your fake image, and now you are willing to let Dominique go to federal prison just to protect his. There is no low you will not sink to. But you have zero power here. The dash cam footage is already logged into the federal hospital database. It is immutable. I could not delete it even if I wanted to. Preston, hearing this, began thrashing violently against the officers again. "Call my father," he screamed, kicking a waiting room chair out of his way. "Somebody call my father right now. He will have all of your badges. He will tear this hospital down to the foundation." The officers had finally had enough. One of them grabbed Preston by the back of his expensive collar, marching him forcefully toward the recovery room exit. "You can make your phone call from the holding cell at the precinct, buddy," the officer said dryly. But before the officers could push Preston through the heavy double doors, a massive commotion erupted in the hallway outside. The sound of rapid, aggressive footsteps echoed off the tile floors. Security guards were yelling, but they were being swiftly pushed aside. The recovery room doors suddenly burst open with explosive force, hitting the walls with a loud, terrifying crash. The air in the room instantly grew cold. Standing in the doorway was Preston's father, Richard Sterling, a notorious billionaire real estate tycoon known for his ruthless business tactics and massive political influence. He was an imposing figure with cold gray eyes and an aura of absolute unchecked authority. Flanking him like a private militia were 4 aggressive-looking corporate lawyers carrying briefcases and wearing $1,000 suits. Richard Sterling surveyed the room, his gaze sweeping past the police officers, past Dominique shivering in her hospital bed, and past my cowering, pathetic parents. His cold eyes locked directly onto me, taking in my blue scrubs and the chief of surgery badge pinned to my chest. He stepped forward, pointing a heavy gold-ringed finger right at my face. "Listen to me very carefully, little girl," the tycoon growled, his voice echoing with absolute menace. "You are going to order these officers to release my son right this second. If those handcuffs are not off him in the next 5 minutes, I will personally ensure your medical license is permanently revoked, and I will bankrupt this entire hospital before the sun comes up." The billionaire real estate tycoon stood in the doorway, radiating pure malice and cold fury. Richard Sterling invaded the sterile hospital space, expecting everyone to cower, and my parents did exactly that immediately. Marcus and Valerie shrank back, looking like terrified little children. Preston smirked suddenly, regaining his arrogant posture now that his powerful father arrived to clean up his mess. Richard took a slow, highly calculated step directly toward me. He looked down, expecting me to tremble under his threat to revoke my medical license. I did not blink or flinch. I stood my ground, crossing my arms over my blue scrubs. I told him he was standing in a sterile recovery area and needed to leave immediately. My father gasped. He rushed forward, waving his hands frantically to placate the angry billionaire. "Richard, please forgive her," Marcus begged, his voice trembling. "She does not understand who you are. We can fix this quietly." Richard ignored my father completely. He stared at me, realizing threats of bankruptcy were not going to make me delete the footage. So he switched tactics. He snapped his fingers, and one of his corporate lawyers stepped forward, opening up a sleek leather briefcase on the rolling medical tray. The lawyer pulled out a thick stack of non-disclosure agreements. Richard then reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a pristine checkbook. He clicked his gold pen and wrote out a number that made my mother choke on her breath. He tore the check out and slapped it down right in front of my father. $1 million. Richard stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. $1 million in untraceable funds, Marcus. All you have to do is sign these non-disclosure agreements and convince your drug-addicted daughter to take the full blame for the car crash. My son walks out of this hospital with a completely clean record, and you walk away a millionaire now. The recovery room went dead silent. Dominique sobbed, realizing she was being actively sold out by her own father-in-law. But the true horror was watching my parents react. Marcus and Valerie had been secretly bankrupt for years. Their elite country club lifestyle was built on fraudulent loans. They stared at that $1 million check like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. They completely ignored that accepting this money meant sending Dominique to federal prison for years. They only saw a way to just save their fake high society image. Marcus swallowed hard. His eyes darted nervously to the police officers who were waiting outside for backup to transport Preston. Marcus reached his hand out. His fingers trembled as he picked up the heavy gold pen. He was actually going to do it. He was going to sign his own daughter into a prison cell for a check. I stepped forward and violently slapped the pen right out of his hand. The gold pen clattered loudly across the linoleum floor, spinning under the hospital bed. Marcus jumped back, looking at me with pure fury. "What is wrong with you?" my father hissed through clenched teeth. "This is our only way out, Camille. This money saves our family." "It saves you," I corrected, my voice dripping with absolute disgust. "You threw me onto the streets 6 years ago to protect her, and now you are selling her to a prison warden to protect yourself. There is no family here. There is just a group of cowards trying to survive on dirty money." Richard Sterling stepped right into my personal space. His face was inches from mine, his gray eyes burning with unchecked rage. He realized I was the only person in the room who could not be bought. He leaned in close, sneering at me with deep racial contempt. "You think you are so righteous," Richard whispered harshly. "You are nothing but a diversity hire playing doctor in a public hospital. People like me run this city. We own the judges. We own the politicians. You are a nobody from a pathetic family of social climbers. You do not know what real power looks like." I did not back away. I looked this arrogant billionaire dead in the eye and let a slow, confident smile spread across my face. "You are right about one thing, Richard," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "My biological family is pathetic. They abandoned me. I missed my own wedding because I had no family to walk me down the aisle. But you are wrong about my understanding of power. When my parents threw me away, my in-laws embraced me unconditionally. They taught me exactly what real untouchable power looks like in this city." Richard frowned, his confident sneer faltering for the very first time. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Before I could answer, the heavy double doors of the emergency room waiting area slid open. The loud commotion outside instantly ceased. A very tall, impeccably dressed man walked into the trauma corridor. His dark tailored suit exuded quiet authority. He was flanked by 6 heavily armed federal agents wearing tactical vests with the letters FBI printed in bold yellow across their chests. The local police officers immediately stepped aside, respectfully clearing a path for him. Preston stopped smiling. Richard turned around, his face draining of all color as he recognized the man walking toward us. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the agents secured the perimeter, blocking all exits. I stepped smoothly around Richard Sterling and walked directly over to the tall, handsome man, greeting him with a warm and loving smile. "Richard," I said proudly, gesturing to the man standing right beside me. "I would absolutely love for you to finally meet my husband. He is the lead federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, and he has been waiting a very long time to have a very serious chat with your entirely corrupt family." Richard Sterling did not wait for my response. He moved with the predatory confidence of a man who believed the entire world had a price tag. He did not care about the flashing lights or the medical equipment surrounding us. He snapped his fingers and one of his corporate lawyers immediately stepped forward, opening a sleek leather briefcase on a rolling medical tray. The lawyer pulled out a thick stack of non-disclosure agreements. Richard then reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a pristine checkbook. He clicked his heavy gold pen and wrote out a number with sharp, aggressive strokes. He tore the check from the booklet and slapped it down right on top of the legal documents directly in front of my father. $1 million. Richard stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous, rumbling purr. $1 million in untraceable funds, Marcus. All you have to do is sign these non-disclosure agreements right now. You take this money, and you convince your drug-addicted daughter to take the full blame for the car crash. My son walks out of this hospital with a completely clean record, and you walk away a millionaire tonight. Make your choice." The recovery room went completely silent. Dominique sobbed from her hospital bed, realizing she was being actively sold out by her own father-in-law to protect his precious white son. But the true horror was watching my own parents react. Marcus and Valerie had been secretly bankrupt for years. Their elite country club lifestyle was built entirely on fraudulent loans and a mountain of debt. They stared at that $1 million check like it was a life raft thrown to a drowning man. They completely ignored the fact that accepting this money meant sending their golden child Dominique to federal prison for years. They only saw a desperate, pathetic way to save their fake high society image. Marcus swallowed hard. His eyes darted nervously toward the police officers who were waiting outside the doors for backup to transport Preston. My father reached his hand out. His fingers trembled violently as he picked up the heavy gold pen. He was actually going to do it. He was going to sign his own injured daughter into a cold prison cell for a piece of paper. I stepped forward and violently slapped the pen right out of his hand. The heavy gold metal clattered loudly across the linoleum floor, spinning under the hospital bed. Marcus jumped back, looking at me with pure, unadulterated fury. "What is wrong with you?" my father hissed through clenched teeth, his face contorted with greedy desperation. "This is our only way out, Camille. This money saves our family. It saves you." I corrected, my voice dripping with absolute disgust. "You threw me onto the cold streets 6 years ago to protect her, and now you are selling her to a prison warden to protect yourself. There is no family here. There is just a group of pathetic cowards trying to survive on dirty money." Richard Sterling stepped right into my personal space. His face was inches from mine, his gray eyes burning with unchecked predatory rage. He realized I was the only person in this room who could not be bought. He leaned in close, sneering at me with deep systemic racial contempt. "You think you are so righteous," Richard whispered harshly, his breath hot against my face. "You are nothing but a diversity hire playing doctor in a public hospital. People like me run this city. We own the judges. We own the politicians. We own the police force. You are a nobody from a pathetic family of desperate social climbers. You have absolutely zero idea what real power looks like." I did not back away. I looked this arrogant billionaire dead in the eye and let a slow, confident smile spread across my face. "You are right about one thing, Richard," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady, echoing with unwavering conviction. "My biological family is entirely pathetic. They abandoned me without a second thought. I missed having my own wedding because I had absolutely no family to walk me down the aisle. But you are completely wrong about my understanding of power. When my parents threw me away, my in-laws embraced me unconditionally. They took me in when I was broken, and they taught me exactly what real, untouchable power looks like in this city." Richard frowned, his confident sneer faltering for the very first time since he barged into my hospital. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice losing its threatening edge. Before I could answer him, the heavy double doors of the emergency room waiting area slid open. The loud, chaotic commotion in the hallway outside instantly ceased. A very tall, impeccably dressed man walked into the trauma corridor. His dark, tailored suit exuded quiet, absolute authority. He was flanked by 6 heavily armed federal agents wearing tactical vests with the letters FBI printed in bold yellow across their chests. The local police officers immediately stepped aside respectfully, clearing a clear path for him. Preston stopped smiling. Richard turned around, his face draining of all color, as he recognized the imposing man walking directly toward us. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the federal agents quickly secured the perimeter, blocking all possible exits. I stepped smoothly around Richard Sterling and walked directly over to the tall, handsome man, greeting him with a warm and loving smile. "Richard," I said proudly, gesturing to the man standing right beside me, "I would absolutely love for you to finally meet my husband. He is the lead federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, and he has been waiting a very long time to have a very serious chat with your entirely corrupt family." This was the exact moment they realized they were finished. Their entire empire was about to crumble into dust forever. Dominique sat against her hospital pillows, her eyes darting frantically around the room. The pain medication pumping through her veins was no match for the sheer terror gripping her chest. She watched her arrogant husband standing in handcuffs. She watched his billionaire father holding a federal subpoena that exposed their massive money laundering operation. And she watched our parents, Marcus and Valerie, staring at the floor with paralyzing dread. Dominique had spent her life manipulating everyone around her. She was a master at reading the room and calculating her best angle for survival. In a matter of seconds, she did the math. Her wealthy white husband was going to federal prison. His family was cutting all ties and throwing her to the wolves. Her parents were bankrupt and now implicated in a massive wire fraud conspiracy. The life she had stolen my identity and my trust fund to build was dead. If she stayed loyal to any of them, she was going down too. She was facing decades behind bars for identity theft, insurance fraud, and whatever financial crimes the FBI was about to uncover. Dominique looked at the federal agent standing by the door. Then she looked at my husband, the lead federal prosecutor who is currently directing his team to secure the crime scene. Dominique made her choice with the ruthless, cold-blooded efficiency of a true sociopath. "Excuse me," Dominique called out from her hospital bed, her voice trembling but surprisingly loud. "Sir, I need to speak to you right now. I have information, I have state evidence." The entire room froze. Marcus and Valerie whipped their heads around, staring at their golden child in absolute shock. Preston glared at her from across the room, his jaw dropping in utter disbelief. My husband turned slowly, walking over to the side of her bed with his hands clasped behind his back. "I am listening carefully," my husband said, his voice calm and deeply authoritative. "What exactly do you want to share with the federal government today?" Dominique did not even look at our parents when she threw them completely under the bus. She pointed a shaking finger directly at Marcus and Valerie. They knew everything. She cried out, tears streaming down her bruised face. My parents knew exactly where Preston's money was coming from. They knowingly signed fraudulent tax returns for the past 5 years to hide the laundered funds. They funneled millions through their investment firm just so they could keep paying for my luxury cars, my designer clothes, and my country club memberships. I have text messages. I have emails. I have proof that they helped Preston hide his assets from the IRS. If you grant me immunity, I will give you every password to their offshore accounts right now. My mother let out a blood-curdling shriek. She stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping on the linoleum floor. Valerie clutched her chest, looking at her daughter like she had just grown horns. "Dominique, how could you?" my mother wailed, her voice cracking with pure agony. "We did all of this for you. We sacrificed everything to give you this life. We protected you." Marcus looked physically ill. His shoulders slumped and he leaned heavily against the medical supply cart, completely broken. The ultimate crushing irony was unfolding right in front of my eyes. 6 years ago, Marcus and Valerie threw me onto the cold streets. They watched me starve. They cut off my tuition and let me drown in debt, all to protect Dominique. They sacrificed their eldest daughter just to maintain their elite status and keep their golden child happy. Now that same golden child was selling them out to the federal government to save her skin. They bred a monster, and now that monster was eating them alive. "I do not care what you did for me," Dominique yelled back at our mother, her true selfish nature fully exposed. "You are broke. You are useless to me now. I am not going to federal prison just to protect your pathetic fake reputation. I am pregnant. I have a life to live." "You are not pregnant," I reminded her, coldly, my voice cutting through her hysterical lies. "We established that an hour ago. You are just a desperate addict trying to negotiate a plea deal." My husband nodded to one of the FBI agents. "Take her statement," he ordered. "Document everything she says about Marcus and Valerie Sterling. Let us see how deep this fraud actually goes." The agent pulled out a notepad and stepped up to the bed. Valerie realized her entire life was over. The country club was gone. The mansion was gone. Her freedom was gone. Spun around, her eyes wide and wild with terror, and she locked her gaze on me. I was the only person in the room with any power. I was the chief of surgery. I was the prosecutor's wife. I was her last and only hope. Valerie threw herself forward. She fell to her knees right in front of me, her silk designer gown pooling on the dirty hospital floor. She reached out with trembling manicured hands and grabbed the fabric of my blue surgical scrubs. "Camille, please!" My mother sobbed hysterically, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "You have to stop this. Talk to your husband. Tell him we are family. Tell him to drop these charges. We will do anything you want. We will make it right. You are our daughter. You are a doctor. You save people. Please, Camille, save us. Do not let them take us away." I looked down at the woman who had caused me so much agony. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness, no obligation. I reached down and firmly pried her desperate fingers off my scrubs. I took a deliberate step back, leaving her kneeling on the hospital floor. "I cannot save you," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "You have been expelled." The final word, expelled, hung in the air like a physical blow. Valerie remained kneeling on the floor, her tear-streaked face looking up at me in absolute shock. She did not understand what I meant. She thought I was using a metaphor for kicking her out of my life. But I never used metaphors when I was operating. I was a surgeon. I was precise. I reached into the pocket of my blue scrubs and pulled out my smartphone. The screen showed an active, unmuted conference call reading 32 minutes. I held the phone up so Valerie and Marcus could clearly see the screen. They squinted at the caller identification display. When they read the name, all blood drained from their faces. It was the executive board of directors of the most exclusive Black elite country club in the state. This organization required a 10-year waiting list and a 7-figure net worth for membership. Valerie had sacrificed my childhood and future just to climb the social ladder and become a lifetime platinum member of that exact club. She prized that membership above her own flesh and blood. I tapped the speaker button on my screen. The crisp, authoritative voice of Beatrice Wellington, the formidable president of the country club, echoed loudly through the recovery room. Beatrice was a woman who commanded absolute respect across the entire city. Her word could make or break a family social standing in seconds. "Valerie," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with pure, unfiltered disdain. "We have heard absolutely everything. Every single word." "No, Beatrice, please," my mother stammered, scrambling backward. "It is a misunderstanding. Dominique is confused from medication. I can explain everything at the gala this weekend. We have been listening since Camille patched us in." Beatrice interrupted sharply. "We heard your daughter confess to federal wire fraud. We heard the details of the narcotics, the identity theft, and the fraudulent tax returns. You have completely disgraced our community." Marcus leaned heavily against the cold hospital wall, clutching his stomach as if he had been physically stabbed. He knew exactly what this meant. In the world of the Black elite, reputation was currency. They would be entirely blacklisted from every bank and social circle they spent 30 years infiltrating. "For 3 decades, you paraded around our club acting superior to everyone else." Beatrice continued, her voice echoing with righteous anger. "You looked down on hardworking families while you secretly funded your fake lifestyle with dirty laundered money from a racist white family. And worse, you threw away your brilliant, successful daughter Camille just to protect a common criminal. You are a disgrace to our people." "Please," Valerie sobbed, placing her hands together. "We will resign quietly. Do not ruin us." "We held an emergency vote," Beatrice stated coldly. "Marcus and Valerie Sterling, your memberships are permanently revoked. You are banned from all club properties and events. If you attempt to show your faces at the country club, security has standing orders to arrest you for trespassing. We are done with you." The line went dead with a sharp click. I lowered my phone and looked down at my parents. 30 years of ruthless social climbing. 30 years of stepping on my neck just to reach the top. It was entirely wiped out in 30 seconds of audio. Their empire of lies was reduced to absolute rubble. My mother collapsed onto her side, curling into a fetal position on the dirty hospital floor. she loudly wailed, clutching her hair, mourning the sudden loss of her precious social status, harder than she ever mourned losing her own daughter. It was a pathetic sight, but the realization of their total absolute destruction hit my father much differently than it hit my mother. Marcus stood frozen against the wall, his eyes widened in sheer panic as the weight of his reality crashed down on him. The federal wire fraud, the bankruptcy, the lost mansion, the public humiliation, and the impending prison sentence all collided in his chest at once. He suddenly gasped loudly for air. His hands flew up to his chest, gripping the fabric of his suit tightly. He let out a loud, wheezing cough, his knees buckling beneath him. He slid down the wall, hitting the floor hard. He was sweating profusely, his face turning a shade of gray. He was having a massive panic attack. "Camille," my father gasped, reaching a trembling hand toward me. "Camille, please help me." My chest. "I cannot breathe. You are a doctor. Save me. Please save your father." The FBI agents stepped back, giving me space to intervene. They expected me to rush forward to check his pulse. They expected the dutiful daughter to save the man who gave her life. I stood perfectly still. I looked at the cruel man who selfishly told me to go sleep in a freezing homeless shelter, when I had absolutely nothing to my name and nowhere else to go. I looked at the pathetic man who was entirely willing to sell my own sister to a federal prison warden for a $1 million check just 20 short minutes ago. I calmly reached over to the intercom system mounted on the wall next to Dominique's bed. I pressed the call button. "Yes, Dr. Sterling." The nursing station answered immediately. "Page, the on-call resident, to recovery room 4. I instructed, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "There is an elderly man on the floor experiencing a severe panic attack. He needs a standard cardiac workup and a mild sedative." "Understood, doctor. The resident is on the way." I released the intercom button. I looked down at my father, who was staring up at me with terrified, pleading eyes. "I am off the clock," I said coldly. I turned my back on the absolute wreckage of my biological family, taking my powerful husband's hand and confidently walking out of the trauma bay without even a single glance backward. I sat behind the oak desk in my office on the 7th floor. The emergency room felt like a lifetime away. I reviewed charts and sipped coffee when the intercom buzzed. My receptionist sounded hesitant. She said 2 people claiming to be my parents were demanding to see me and refusing to leave. I told her to send them in. I knew this moment was coming. The federal government moves with terrifying speed when dealing with corporate wire fraud. The heavy wooden door opened, and Marcus and Valerie shuffled into my office. Just 48 hours ago, they were the arrogant picture of the black elite. Now they looked completely broken and defeated. My mother was not wearing custom silk dresses or diamond necklaces. She wore a faded, oversized trench coat and flat shoes. Her perfect hair was frizzy and unstyled, framing a pale, exhausted face. My father looked like he had suddenly aged 10 painful years. His posture was deeply hunched, his eyes were severely bloodshot, and he wore a simple, wrinkled, button-down shirt. They looked like 2 desperate and deeply terrified strangers who had just survived a horrific shipwreck. They did not even wait for a formal invitation to sit down. Valerie practically collapsed into one of the leather guest chairs, covering her face with her trembling hands. Marcus stood awkwardly near the door, unable to look me in the eye. "The federal agents raided the house early this morning." My father croaked, his voice entirely devoid of its usual booming, arrogant authority. "They seized the luxury cars and offshore bank accounts. Everything is completely frozen, Camille. We cannot even buy a single cup of coffee right now. We have absolutely nothing left to our names." Valerie looked up, her eyes red and pleading. She leaned heavily across my desk, her hands shaking violently. "We have nowhere to go." "Camille," she sobbed loudly, her voice cracking with raw panic. "The country club changed the locks on our locker and threw our things in the trash. All of our high society friends are ignoring our calls, and nobody in this entire city will ever help us. We need to stay at your house. You have that massive property out in the suburbs. We just need to stay in your guest rooms until this massive legal misunderstanding gets cleared up. You have to take us in right now. We are your family." We are your parents. You owe us that unconditional love and family duty. I slowly set my pen down and leaned back in my chair, studying their pathetic faces. Unconditional love. I repeated, letting the heavy words hang in the quiet office. That is a truly fascinating concept coming from you, Mom. Let us talk about family duty for a moment. 6 years ago, I stood on the front porch of your multi-million-dollar mansion in the freezing rain. I was completely broke, starving, and begging for a safe place to sleep because Dominique stole my medical school trust fund and lied about me dropping out. I continued, my voice calm but sharp as a surgical scalpel. I begged you just to let me sleep on the basement sofa until I could find a second minimum wage job. Do you remember what you told me, Dad? Marcus looked away, his face flushing with deep, undeniable shame. You looked me dead in the eye and told me that failures do not sleep under your prestigious roof, I reminded him coldly. You told me to go sleep at a downtown homeless shelter so I could learn a valuable lesson about disappointing the pristine family legacy. You locked the heavy front door and turned off the porch light, leaving your own daughter alone in the freezing dark. I slept in the back of a dangerous bus terminal for 2 grueling weeks. Valerie cried harder, trying to grab my hand across the desk. We were wrong, she wailed loudly. We were so wrong, Camille. We admit it now. You cannot hold that against us forever. We are your blood. We have nowhere else to go tonight. You cannot leave your own mother out on the unforgiving streets. I smoothly pulled my hand away from her desperate grasp. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and reached inside. I pulled out a thick legal document bound in heavy blue cardstock. It was not a medical chart or a patient file. It was a certified property deed. I tossed it onto the center of the desk, right next to her trembling hands. I am not holding anything against you, I stated plainly, maintaining my icy professional demeanor. I am simply enforcing the exact same rigorous standards you taught me. You see, when the federal investigators started looking into Preston and his family, money laundering operations last year, your secret financial bankruptcy became public knowledge in certain elite banking circles. You stopped paying the massive mortgage on your precious high society mansion 3 months ago. The bank quietly placed the property into immediate default. Marcus stared at the thick document on the desk, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror. He recognized the official bank seal stamped on the front of the deed. He reached out with shaking fingers to read the name printed clearly under the transfer of ownership clause. You wrongly assumed the bank would give you more time because of your elevated social status, I explained, watching the realization crush whatever tiny fraction of hope they had left. But the bank legally sold all the massive debt to a private holding company. I bought the debt to your multi-million-dollar estate in pure cash. I own the certified deed to the property outright. So no, you are absolutely not staying at my house tonight. And you are no longer staying at yours either. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate my premises before I have the county sheriff forcefully evict you for trespassing. My parents stumbled out of my office looking like hollow shells of the arrogant society figures they had been just 2 days ago. I watched the heavy wooden door click shut behind them, feeling absolutely no remorse. They made their choices 6 years ago when they prioritized a lie over my survival. Now they were experiencing the natural consequences of their own toxic actions. I sat back in my leather chair, taking a slow sip of my coffee. My pager vibrated sharply against my desk, breaking the silence. It was a notification from the secure recovery ward on the 4th floor. The message was brief and clinical, indicating the patient in room 4 had been medically cleared for immediate discharge. It was time to deal with Dominique. I took the elevator down to the recovery wing, my mind perfectly clear and focused. When I arrived at her room, the scene was a stark contrast to the chaotic VIP spectacle my parents tried to orchestrate on the night of the crash. Dominique was no longer surrounded by fawning nurses or wrapped in luxury hospital blankets. Her premium health insurance had been completely voided the moment the identity theft was flagged. She was dressed in a cheap set of standard-issue gray hospital scrubs because her expensive designer dress had been cut away during the trauma surgery. She sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, looking small, pale, and entirely stripped of her fake high society armor. The bruises on her face were healing, but her ego was visibly shattered. A stern transport nurse stood by the door, holding a standard wheelchair. "You are cleared to leave the hospital premises," Dominique announced, stepping into the room with my hands tucked coolly into my lab coat pockets. "Your physical injuries are stabilized, and you no longer require acute medical care. Since your fraudulent insurance policy has been permanently terminated, the administration requires you to vacate this bed immediately." Dominique glared at me, her eyes flashing with a mix of leftover entitlement and genuine fear. "You cannot just throw me out on the street, Camille," she snapped, her voice lacking its usual commanding pitch. "I do not have my phone. I do not have my purse. Preston took everything when they arrested him. How am I supposed to get home?" I smiled, a tight, humorless smile. "Oh, you are not going home, Dominique. Your husband is in federal custody, and your parents are currently being evicted from their mansion. But do not worry about your transportation. Your ride is already waiting for you at the front entrance." The transport nurse helped a grumbling Dominique into the wheelchair and pushed her down the long, sterile corridor toward the main hospital exit. I walked a few paces behind them, watching my sister nervously wring her hands. She probably expected a sleek black town car, or at the very least, one of her elite country club friends waiting to whisk her away. As the automatic glass doors of the discharge bay slid open, the warm afternoon air rushed in. But there was no luxury vehicle waiting at the curb. Instead, a standard black and white police cruiser idled near the loading zone. Two plainclothes detectives stood by the hood holding a thick manila folder. Dominique froze, her hands gripping the armrests of the wheelchair so hard her knuckles turned white. One of the detectives stepped forward, flashing a gold badge. "Dominique Sterling," he said, his voice loud and authoritative. "We hold an active warrant for your immediate arrest on multiple felony charges, including identity theft, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." The reality of her situation finally crashed down on her with the force of a freight train. The walls of her fake elite world completely disintegrated. Dominique let out a loud, terrified wail, scrambling out of the wheelchair and throwing herself directly at my feet. Dominique collapsed onto the concrete pavement, hitting her knees hard. She grabbed the fabric of my lab coat, looking up at me with hysterical tears streaming down her bruised face. "Camille, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking with pure pathetic desperation. "You have to pay my bail. You have to call your husband and tell him to get me out of this. I cannot go to jail, Camille. Look at me. I am too fragile for this. I am a refined society woman. I will not survive a single night in a filthy county lockup. They will destroy me in there. You have the money. You have the power. You are my sister. You have to protect me." I looked down at her crying on the pavement and felt a profound sense of déjà vu. This was the exact same theatrical performance Dominique used our entire childhood. Whenever she broke a priceless vase, stole money from our mother, or failed a class, she would instantly play the fragile, helpless victim. She would turn on the waterworks act, incredibly delicate, and manipulate our parents into forcing me to take the blame. She weaponized her fake fragility to escape accountability her entire life, while I was always deemed the strong one who could handle the consequences. 6 years ago, she played this exact fragile victim role to steal my medical school trust fund and get me thrown onto the streets. But we were not children anymore, and I was no longer the family scapegoat. I looked at the detectives who were waiting patiently for me to step away so they could apply the handcuffs. I reached down and firmly pried Dominique's trembling fingers off my white lab coat. I did not yell. I did not show an ounce of pity. I reached into the deep pocket of my scrub pants and pulled out a single crumpled $200 bill. It was the exact amount of cash my parents had carelessly thrown at me when they kicked me out of the house and told me to go survive in a homeless shelter. I let the crumpled bill drop from my fingers. It fluttered through the air and landed right on the concrete next to Dominique's shaking knees. "Call an Uber," I said, my voice ice cold. "The county jail is 10 miles away." The afternoon sun dipped below the Manhattan skyline, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany tables of Le Bernardin. I had received the invitation through a highly secured courier service earlier that morning. It was a formal request for a private meeting from Richard Sterling, the billionaire real estate tycoon whose empire was currently crumbling under the weight of my husband's federal investigation. He requested a quiet table in the most exclusive restaurant, assuming that proximity to extreme wealth would automatically intimidate me into submission. He was operating under the arrogant delusion that because my parents Marcus and Valerie were pathetic social climbers willing to sell their souls for a country club membership, I must share that same greedy DNA. He severely miscalculated. I arrived on time wearing a sharp, tailored suit that commanded immediate respect. Richard was already seated at a secluded corner table far away from prying eyes and listening ears. Or so he thought. He did not bother to stand when I approached. He simply gestured to the empty chair across from him, swirling a glass of scotch with a tight, confident smile. He looked like a man who believed he held all the winning cards in a high-stakes game. I sat down, placing my leather handbag deliberately on the table between us. Tucked securely inside the lining of that bag was a high-grade federal recording device that had been activated the moment I stepped out of my car. Dr. Sterling. Richard began, his voice smooth and dripping with artificial charm. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me today. I know tensions have been incredibly high since the unfortunate incident at the hospital. I want to apologize for my initial outburst. I am a protective father, and seeing my son in handcuffs made me lose my temper. However, I am a businessman at heart, and businessmen know how to find mutually beneficial solutions to any problem. I did not touch the sparkling water the waiter had poured. I simply maintained eye contact, waiting for him to play his hand. I am listening, Richard. I said, my tone perfectly neutral. Tell me exactly what kind of solution you have in mind. He leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms on the mahogany table. He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke suit and produced a crisp white envelope. He slid it slowly across the table until it touched the edge of my handbag. Inside that envelope is a certified cashier's check. Richard stated, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It is made out to you for exactly $500,000. I did my research, Camille. I know your parents let Dominique steal your $200,000 medical school trust fund. I know they threw you onto the streets to protect her. That was a tragedy. I am offering you the return of your stolen trust fund, plus a very generous $300,000 in interest for your pain and suffering. I looked down at the crisp white envelope and then back up at his arrogant face. And what exactly am I purchasing with this generous $500,000? I asked, keeping my expression blank. Your husband is the lead federal prosecutor running the wire fraud and money laundering case against my son. Richard explained, his eyes gleaming with predatory intent. He loves you unconditionally. He listens to you. If you tell him that pursuing this case is causing you severe emotional distress, if you convince him to drop the charges and let Preston walk away with a simple misdemeanor traffic violation, this money is yours free and clear. You can consider it true justice for what your family did to you. You finally get your money back, Camille. We all walk away happy and unscathed. He sat back, taking a satisfied sip of his scotch. He was entirely convinced he had just won. He looked at me with the exact same expression my father Marcus used whenever he thought he had successfully manipulated someone of lower social standing. Richard Sterling genuinely believed that integrity was just a buzzword poor people used to justify their lack of capital. I reached out and placed my hand firmly over the envelope. I did not open it. I simply slid it right back across the polished table, pushing it directly into his glass of scotch. You really do not understand who you are dealing with, Richard, I said, my voice cold and echoing with absolute conviction. You spent 30 years doing business with cowards like my parents. You watched Marcus and Valerie sacrifice their own daughter, sell their morals, and break the law just to gain access to your elite white circles. You bought their loyalty for pennies. You assume that because I share their blood, my integrity can be purchased with a larger check. But you are forgetting one crucial detail. I am the woman who survived their brutal betrayal. I am the woman who built a brilliant career and a beautiful life entirely on my own merit after they left me to starve. I do not need your dirty money. My success was built on grit and honesty, two things your spoiled, entitled son knows absolutely nothing about. Richard frowned, his confident smile vanishing. His face flushed with sudden, uncontrollable anger. "Do not be a massive fool, Camille," he hissed, slamming his hand on the table. "You take this money, or I will make sure your husband's career is completely destroyed by the political machinery I control in this city. You are crossing a dangerous line you cannot uncross." "I am not crossing a line," I replied smoothly, standing up from my chair. "I am drawing one right here." I picked up my handbag, ensuring the recording device was perfectly secure. Then I raised my hand and signaled politely for our waiter. The young man in the crisp white apron approached our table immediately. But instead of handing us a leather-bound checkbook, he reached into the inner pocket of his uniform vest. He pulled out a gleaming silver badge and a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Richard Sterling, the undercover federal agent, announced, his voice loud enough to silence the luxury dining room. "You are under arrest for the attempted bribery of a federal official and witness tampering." Richard completely froze, the color draining from his face as the agent locked the cold steel cuffs around his wrists. I looked down at the ruined billionaire, offering him a final, terrifying smile. "Enjoy federal prison, Richard. Your money is no good there." Leaving the elite Manhattan restaurant behind, I felt a profound sense of closure regarding the Sterling Empire. Richard was locked away, and Preston was already sitting in a federal holding cell, but there was one final loose thread demanding my attention. 2 days later, I received an urgent, desperate phone call from a severely overworked public defender. He pleaded with me to visit the county lockup, stating his client, Dominique Sterling, was entirely inconsolable and refusing to cooperate with her own legal defense, unless she spoke to me first. I drove my car out to the bleak maximum security concrete facility located on the barren industrial outskirts of the city. The stark contrast between the luxury hospital suite she demanded last week and the bleak, oppressive reality of the county jail was absolute. I walked through the heavy metal detectors and followed a stern correctional officer down a long gray corridor, echoing with the sounds of slamming iron doors. I took a seat in the sterile visitation room, separated by a thick pane of smudged bulletproof glass. A door on the opposite side buzzed open. Dominique was escorted into the room wearing an oversized, scratchy orange jumpsuit that swallowed her formerly glamorous frame. Her premium blonde highlights were dull and matted. Her expensive designer makeup was entirely washed away, revealing the incredibly dark, exhausted bags under her puffy, bloodshot eyes. She picked up the heavy black plastic telephone, receiver on her side of the glass with trembling hands. I picked up mine, waiting in complete silence. The moment she heard the line connect, Dominique immediately burst into loud theatrical tears. She pressed her free hand desperately against the dirty, smudged glass, looking at me with wide, absolutely terrified eyes. "Camille, thank God you came," she sobbed, her voice echoing through the cheap plastic receiver. "I thought you would ignore the lawyer's request. You are the only person left in the world who can help me. Everyone else has completely abandoned me." I stared right back at her, keeping my facial expression perfectly flat and entirely unbothered. "You are facing 5 years in a federal penitentiary for identity theft and insurance fraud, Dominique," I stated coldly. "I am not here to help you. I am here because I wanted to look you in the eye, now that your protective elite bubble has finally collapsed." Dominique wiped her nose on the rough sleeve of her jumpsuit, switching her strategy to desperate psychological manipulation. She leaned closer to the glass, lowering her voice into a pathetic, pleading tone. "Camille, please," she whined. "We are sisters. Do you remember when we were little girls? We used to hide in the backyard and play together before Mom and Dad ruined everything? It is their fault. Camille, Marcus, and Valerie are the real monsters here. They pitted us against each other to survive in that toxic house. They created this sick competition. They made me feel like I had to be perfect and step on you just to earn their love. I am a victim of their horrible parenting, just like you are. We are on the same side." I intentionally let her finish her entire pathetic victim monologue before I completely and brutally dismantled it. I am not denying that Marcus and Valerie are incredibly toxic parents, I replied, my voice sharp and uncompromising. They were terrible to both of us. But you do not get to use their bad parenting as a blanket excuse for your own malicious independent choices. Our parents did not force you to intercept my university mail. Our parents did not force you to forge a withdrawal letter and fake my signature. Our parents did not force you to lie to their faces and tell them I was a drug addict. You calculated every single one of those moves entirely on your own. You deliberately chose to steal my $200,000 medical school trust fund because you wanted a lavish destination wedding, and you did not care if I starved on the streets to fund it. You chose to steal my medical license and my social security number last week. Those were not the desperate survival tactics of a traumatized daughter, Dominique. Those were the actions of a greedy, selfish criminal. Dominique flinched as if I had physically struck her through the bulletproof glass. The realization that her lifelong victim act was completely useless against me finally settled in her panicked eyes. She dropped her head, her shoulders shaking with genuine despair. She knew without a doubt that she was permanently cornered. She looked back up at me, fresh tears streaming down her face. Her voice dropped to a desperate, pathetic whisper. I am begging you, Camille, she cried. I am begging you for mercy. My public defender said the judge is leaning toward the maximum sentence because I showed zero remorse. He said my only chance at getting a reduced sentence is a character reference letter from a respected member of the community. You are the chief of surgery. You are a highly respected doctor. If you just write a formal letter to the judge saying I am essentially a good person who just made a very terrible, uncharacteristic mistake, he might actually reduce my prison time. Please, Camille, just write the character reference letter. It costs you nothing. I looked directly at the miserable woman who spent her entire adult life trying to completely destroy mine. I slowly reached into my black leather briefcase and pulled out a crisp, professionally folded piece of thick legal paper. I slid it through the narrow metal slot at the bottom of the security glass. Dominique eagerly snatched it up, her eyes wide with sudden, desperate hope. It is a character reference, I proudly announced, offering her a very slow, chilling smile. But it is a legally binding sworn affidavit detailing every single lie. Theft and manipulation you ever committed against me, please hand it directly to the sentencing judge. The federal justice system moves with a deliberate, crushing weight, especially when dealing with high-profile cases. 6 months had passed since the explosive confrontation in the emergency room. The media completely devoured the Sterling family empire. Marcus and Valerie were stripped of their passports, assets, and remaining dignity. They were indicted on federal charges and forced to rely on a public defender because elite attorneys demanded retainers they could not afford. I received the call on a Tuesday morning. David, the public defender, asked me to meet my parents to discuss the trial. He explained they were struggling to build a defense strategy and needed a character witness to plead for leniency before the judge. I agreed immediately, but not for the reasons they assumed. I arrived at the bleak municipal building, a stark contrast to the marble lobbies my parents frequented. I was escorted into a cramped, windowless conference room, smelling of stale coffee. Marcus and Valerie sat on the opposite side of a scratched wooden table. They looked out of place in their cheap clothing, but the moment I walked in, their posture shifted. They straightened their backs, attempting to summon their former high society arrogance. They believed my presence meant I had cracked under familial obligation. They assumed the ingrained rules of the black elite had ultimately overridden my common sense. Camille. My mother sighed heavily, offering a tight, practiced smile that completely failed to reach her eyes. We knew you would eventually come to your senses. We told David here that blood is always thicker than water. No matter how messy things got at the hospital, you are still our daughter. And you understand the absolute necessity of protecting the family name. I took my seat across from them, smoothing out the jacket of my tailored suit. I did not return her smile. David? The public defender leaned forward, looking visibly relieved by my calm demeanor. Dr. Sterling, thank you so much for coming. He began shuffling through a stack of disorganized manila folders. Your parents are facing incredibly serious federal charges. The prosecution is pushing for the maximum sentence, given your prestigious position as the chief of trauma surgery and your pristine standing. In the community, your testimony as a primary character witness could significantly mitigate the sentencing guidelines. We need you to take the stand and testify to their moral character, their history of community service, and their dedication to your family. My father leaned across the table, resting his folded hands on the scratched wood. He looked at me with an expression of desperate entitlement, trying to play the role of the wise patriarch. One last time. You have to do this, Camille Marcus stated, his voice attempting to command the room. You have to protect us on that stand. We did everything for the survival of this family. We made some very difficult financial choices, but it was all to keep a roof over our heads and maintain our crucial standing in the community. We were just trying to secure a future for Dominique and by extension for you. You cannot let the federal government destroy your own flesh and blood over a simple financial misunderstanding. I stared at him, letting his pathetic, delusional words echo in the small room. They were still doing it. They were still actively trying to gaslight me into believing their greed was actually a noble sacrifice. They wanted me to sit under oath in a federal courtroom and perjure myself to save the exact same people who threw me onto the street to starve. A simple financial misunderstanding. I repeated, my voice flat and icy cold. You knowingly laundered millions of dollars in dirty money for a racist white real estate tycoon just so you could pay for country club memberships and designer clothes. You let Dominique steal my $200,000 medical school trust fund and watched me sleep in a freezing bus terminal. You actively participated in hiding her identity theft, and you were entirely willing to sell her to a federal prison warden for a $1 million bribe just 6 months ago. And now you want me to sit on a witness stand and testify to your moral character. Valerie slammed her hand down on the table, her eyes flashing with sudden, desperate anger. You owe us, Camille, she hissed, her voice rising in pitch. We gave you life. We raised you. You have a duty to protect the respectability of this family. You are married to a federal prosecutor. You know exactly how the system works. You have to get up on that stand and defend us, or we will lose everything. I am fully aware of how the federal justice system works. Mom, I replied, maintaining perfect, unwavering eye contact. I know exactly what is required in a high-profile fraud trial. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, securely bound legal dossier. I slid it slowly across the table, stopping it right in front of the confused public defender. I am not here to be your character witness, I stated, my voice ringing with absolute finality. I am actually the prosecution's star witness. Marcus and Valerie froze, the color instantly draining from their faces. David, the public defender, opened the dossier, his eyes widening as he scanned the first page. When Dominique tried to use my medical license and social security number to secure VIP treatment, I did not just flag it. I continued leaning forward so my parents could hear every single syllable. Clearly, I initiated a full forensic audit of the hospital billing network. I uncovered the digital logs, proving you both actively signed the fraudulent guarantor paperwork to process her fake insurance claims. I handed every single piece of that irrefutable hard evidence directly to the FBI 3 months ago. You are absolutely going to prison, and I am the exact one putting you there. The federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan became ground zero for the most explosive society trial of the decade. News vans lined the busy streets, and aggressive reporters swarmed the heavy granite steps, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fallen Sterling Empire. Inside the grand mahogany-paneled courtroom, the atmosphere was absolutely suffocating. I sat calmly in the prosecution waiting room while the trial commenced. Through the heavy wooden doors, I could hear the initial intense proceedings. Preston, Dominique, Marcus, and Valerie were seated at separate defense tables, completely refusing to look at one another. They had spent their entire adult lives pretending to be a unified front of untouchable elite wealth, But the moment federal prison time became an unavoidable reality, that toxic family loyalty completely evaporated. The prosecution laid out a damning timeline of sophisticated money laundering, massive identity theft, and aggressive insurance fraud. The sheer volume of evidence presented by the federal government was staggering, but the real spectacle began when the defense teams started presenting their respective cases. Instead of fighting the federal government, my biological family decided to brutally fight each other. Preston took the witness stand first. He completely abandoned his arrogant billionaire heir persona and desperately played the role of a naive, manipulated husband. He pointed his trembling finger directly at Dominique, claiming she orchestrated the entire financial fraud because she was desperate to maintain a lavish lifestyle she could no longer afford. Dominique retaliated with ferocious energy the very next day. She took the stand sobbing hysterically and painted Preston as an abusive, controlling monster who forced her to steal my medical credentials. Then she turned her sights directly on our parents. She loudly testified that Marcus and Valerie were the true masterminds who knowingly laundered Preston's dirty real estate money just to keep their failing country club status afloat. Marcus and Valerie looked physically ill as their golden child systematically destroyed them under oath in front of the entire city. The federal trial mutated into a vicious public bloodbath. They were tearing each other to absolute shreds, and I was scheduled to deliver the final fatal blow. On the second week of the highly publicized trial, the lead federal prosecutor called me to the witness stand. The crowded courtroom fell completely silent as I walked down the center aisle wearing a sharp, dark gray tailored suit. I took the solemn oath and sat down looking directly at the four people who had actively ruined my 20s. Dominique refused to meet my steady gaze, but my mother stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. After the prosecution established my impeccable medical credentials and my discovery of the insurance fraud, the primary defense attorney approached the wooden podium. He was a highly paid, ruthless lawyer representing my parents, and he immediately tried to dismantle my professional credibility. He paced back and forth, attempting to paint me as a bitter, unstable woman seeking petty revenge. He asked if it was true that I was deeply estranged from my family. He loudly suggested that I was insanely jealous of Dominique because she married into extreme wealth while I was struggling to pay for medical school. He spun a pathetic narrative claiming I fabricated the hospital digital logs purely to punish my parents for kicking me out of their house 6 years ago. I did not raise my voice. I did not act defensive or angry. I utilized the exact same cold clinical composure I used when operating on critical trauma patients. I leaned forward into the microphone and systematically shattered his entire ridiculous argument. I explained that secure medical network servers do not operate on human emotion or petty sibling jealousy. They operate on strict biometric security protocols and encrypted digital timestamps. I directed the jury to the massive screen displaying the hospital administration logs. I pointed out the exact internet protocol addresses and digital signatures, proving that Valerie and Marcus physically logged into the hospital guarantor portal using their own personal devices to authorize Dominique's fake insurance claims. I broke down the complex medical billing codes, explaining how impossible it would be for a third party to manipulate those specific secure files without dual authentication from the primary account holders. I spoke with absolute medical and technical authority, dismantling the defense attorney's narrative piece by piece, until he was left standing at the podium with nothing but a stack of useless papers. The jury was entirely captivated by the irrefutable hard evidence I presented. The defense attorney stammered, trying desperately to find a tiny loophole in my rock-solid testimony, but there was absolutely nothing left to exploit. He awkwardly thanked me and rapidly retreated to his seat. The terrifying realization that they had officially lost the case swept through the defense tables like a massive shockwave. Preston suddenly lost whatever small shred of sanity he had left. He jumped out of his heavy wooden chair, pointing furiously at Dominique. He screamed at the top of his lungs that she was a manipulative, drug-addicted parasite and that she planned the entire fraud from the very beginning. Dominique snapped completely under the pressure. She grabbed a heavy glass pitcher of ice water from her defense table and hurled it violently across the room directly at Preston's head. The heavy glass shattered against the wood paneling, sending freezing water and sharp shards flying everywhere. Complete absolute chaos erupted in the courtroom. Federal marshals rushed forward, tackling Preston and Dominique to the ground as they viciously screamed at each other. The judge furiously pounded his wooden gavel repeatedly, demanding immediate order and holding them all in immediate contempt of court. As the bailiffs dragged them back to their seats, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the room opened. The jury foreperson stepped forward, holding a folded slip of paper, announcing loudly over the screaming that they had already reached a final verdict. The chaotic screaming abruptly ceased the moment the jury foreperson stepped up to the microphone. The heavy wooden gavel struck the mahogany block one final time, echoing loudly through the federal courtroom. Preston and Dominique were forcefully shoved back into their heavy chairs by the federal marshals, breathless and disheveled from their violent physical altercation. Marcus and Valerie sat completely frozen at their defense table, gripping the edges of the polished wood so hard their knuckles turned white. The arrogant elite armor they had worn for 30 years was entirely stripped away, leaving nothing but two cowards waiting for the absolute end of their privileged lives. The jury foreperson handed the folded slip of paper to the bailiff, who walked it silently up to the high bench. The federal judge put on his reading glasses, unfolding the document with agonizing slowness. He scanned the pages, his expression hardening into a mask of pure judicial contempt. He looked down at the defendants sitting before him, his eyes filled with absolute disgust. He asked the defendants to rise. Preston struggled to stand, his tailored suit torn from the fight. Dominique was trembling, so violently she had to lean against her public defender just to stay on her feet. Marcus and Valerie stood up with their heads bowed, unable to look anywhere but the floor. On the charges of federal wire fraud, massive identity theft, and insurance fraud, the judge began, his voice booming through the silent courtroom. The jury finds the defendants guilty on all counts. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery of reporters and former friends who had come exclusively to watch the Sterling family burn to the ground. The judge did not stop there. Because of the overwhelming evidence and the sheer malicious nature of these crimes, I am waiving the standard delay and moving directly to sentencing today. The swift efficiency of the justice system was terrifying to witness from the defense tables. Preston Sterling. The judge continued, glaring at the arrogant heir. You utilized your wealth and privilege to manipulate, endanger, and defraud multiple victims, including your own wife. Your sense of entitlement ends today. You are sentenced to 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Preston collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands, as the reality of a decade behind iron bars finally shattered his billionaire illusion. Dominique Sterling. The judge turned his gaze toward my sister. You actively stole your sister's medical credentials, drained her academic trust fund, and participated in a massive money laundering conspiracy to maintain a fraudulent luxury lifestyle. Your endless manipulation has finally run out of victims. You are sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, followed by strict supervised release. Dominique let out a blood-curdling wail, covering her face as she sobbed, begging the judge for a second chance that she absolutely did not deserve. Then the judge turned his attention to my parents. Marcus and Valerie stood completely paralyzed, tears streaming down their exhausted faces. They waited for the heavy hammer of federal prison to fall on them too. The judge leaned forward, resting his hands on the high bench, looking at them with a chilling level of disdain. Marcus and Valerie, he said, his voice dropping into a harsh tone, you two are perhaps the most tragic figures in this entire courtroom. You did not orchestrate the initial fraud, but your blinding greed and your toxic obsession with elite social status allowed this massive criminal enterprise to flourish right under your own roof. You willingly turned a blind eye to obvious corruption because you desperately wanted to maintain your proximity to white wealth and high society power. The evidence presented in this very courtroom showed that you actively sacrificed your eldest daughter, throwing a brilliant, resilient young woman onto the unforgiving streets just to protect the malicious lies of your golden child. Your blind favoritism, and your pathetic need for social validation led directly to the absolute destruction of your own empire. My parents sobbed loudly, their shoulders shaking with profound agony as their lifelong hypocrisy was publicly laid bare for the entire city to witness. Because you were ultimately manipulated by the primary defendants, and because of your advanced age, I am suspending your prison sentences, the judge declared. Marcus and Valerie let out loud, gasping breaths of relief, but that relief was instantly extinguished. However, the judge continued harshly, "You will not escape the severe consequences of your act of complicity. You are hereby ordered to pay crippling financial restitution that will entirely liquidate your remaining assets. You will serve 10 years of strict federal probation, and you are mandated to complete 5,000 hours of grueling physical community service. You are leaving this courtroom today, completely bankrupt, entirely destitute, and publicly disgraced. Your fake elite kingdom is gone forever." The judge struck his wooden gavel with finality, adjourning the court. The federal marshals immediately moved in, pulling Preston and Dominique out of their chairs and securing heavy steel handcuffs around their wrists. Dominique screamed wildly as she was forcefully dragged toward the holding cells, her glamorous life officially over. Preston walked with his head down, completely broken. Marcus and Valerie were left standing alone at their defense table. They had absolutely nothing left to their names. No mansion, no country club memberships, no offshore accounts, and no golden child to worship. As the bailiffs moved them toward the side exit, Valerie stopped and looked across the crowded gallery directly at me. I stood perfectly still, watching her. Valerie reached her trembling hand out over the wooden gallery railing, her face twisted in pure agony. She looked at the successful, powerful daughter she had thrown away and silently mouthed the words, "I am sorry." I looked at her desperate, tear-stained face. I felt absolutely no pity. I turned my back to her and confidently walked out of the courtroom without a single second glance. The crisp autumn air carried a bitter chill as my husband and I parked our car along the pristine, tree-lined street of the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. Today was the official county foreclosure auction for the sprawling multi-million-dollar estate that formerly belonged to Marcus and Valerie Sterling. My parents had spent 3 decades clawing their way into this elite suburban enclave. They sacrificed their morals, their finances, and my entire future just to secure a spot behind these heavy wrought iron gates. Now the federal government was selling their precious kingdom to the highest bidder to recoup the massive fines from their wire fraud convictions. We walked up the long paved driveway toward the manicured front lawn where a small crowd had already gathered. The imposing brick mansion loomed over us, a physical monument to the toxic greed that ultimately destroyed my biological family. I felt a firm, reassuring squeeze on my hand. My husband walked proudly beside me, his presence a quiet reminder of the untouchable power and genuine love I had found after being thrown away. We stood at the back of the crowd, watching the county auctioneer set up his podium right on the front steps. The crowd was not made up of ordinary real estate investors or regular families looking for a new home. The people standing on the manicured grass were the exact same high society figures who used to attend my mother's lavish dinner parties. I recognized the designer coats, the expensive handbags, and the judgmental whispers immediately. These were the elite country club members who had gladly eaten my parents' expensive catered food while simultaneously plotting their downfall. Standing front center was Evelyn Carter, a notorious gossip, and the vice president of the social committee. She was flanked by 3 other wealthy matriarchs, all holding bitter paddles and laughing cruelly. I knew exactly who they were. These were the exact same women who spent the last 6 years whispering vicious rumors about me. When Dominique lied and stole my medical school trust fund, my mother went to these exact women and spun a pathetic tale about how I was a drug-addicted dropout. Evelyn and her friends had eagerly consumed that lie, spreading it across the city to ensure my reputation was entirely ruined. They had looked at me with pure disgust when I was homeless. Now they were standing on my parents' front lawn, practically salivating at the chance to buy the Sterling estate for pennies on the dollar, just to finalize my family ultimate humiliation. Evelyn spotted me standing at the back of the crowd. Her cruel smile widened as she leaned over to whisper something to her friends. She probably assumed I was there to mourn the loss of my childhood home, or maybe beg for some of the leftover furniture. She loudly adjusted her fur collar and raised her chin, preparing to dominate the auction. The county auctioneer cleared his throat and officially opened the bidding at a heavily discounted baseline price. Evelyn instantly raised her paddle, offering the minimum bid with a smug, triumphant laugh. She looked around the lawn, daring anyone to challenge her claim to the ultimate society trophy. A few minor investors raised their paddles, attempting to secure the property, but Evelyn aggressively countered every single bid. She wanted the Sterling mansion not to live in, but to use as a rental property, just to completely mock my mother, Valerie. The price slowly crept up, but it remained drastically below the actual market value of the estate. Evelyn raised her paddle again, calling out a final lowball offer. The auctioneer scanned the crowd, asking if anyone else was willing to challenge the bid. He raised his wooden gavel, preparing to strike it down and hand my childhood home over to the very woman who helped destroy my name. I let go of my husband's hand and took a slow, deliberate step forward. I did not raise a paddle, I simply raised my hand high in the air and projected my voice clearly across the quiet lawn. I called out a bid that was exactly $1 million higher than Evelyn. Pathetic offer. The entire crowd whipped their heads around, staring at me in absolute shock. Evelyn lowered her paddle, her mouth dropping open in sheer disbelief. She stared at my tailored suit and the confident, unbothered expression on my face. "You cannot bid that much." Evelyn sputtered, her voice cracking with indignation. "You do not have that kind of capital. Camille, we all know your parents cut you off when you failed out of school. You are just a public hospital employee. You cannot possibly afford this estate." I did not raise my voice, but my response cut through the crisp air like a surgical blade. "I am the chief of trauma surgery, Evelyn," I stated coldly. "And contrary to the pathetic lies my mother fed you at your little country club brunches, I never failed a single class in my life. I earned every penny of my wealth, while you all sat around gossiping about my fabricated demise." Evelyn raised her paddle, trying to outbid me. I doubled her offer without hesitation. My voice rang, leaving no room for debate. Evelyn stood frozen, realizing she was outmatched. The auctioneer struck his gavel, announcing the property was sold to me. I walked forward to sign the paperwork, paying for the estate in cash. Evelyn marched up to the table, glaring at me. "What do you plan to do with this property, Camille?" she demanded. "Are you going to live in the shell of your parents?" "Epic failure," I finished. Signing the deed and handed the pen back, I turned, offering a smile that chilled her to the core. "I am not going to live here, Evelyn," I announced, my voice carrying across the lawn. "I am bulldozing this mansion to build a free medical clinic. It is my revenge." 6 months later, the crisp autumn wind that had swept across the auction lawn was replaced by the warm, bright sunshine of a beautiful spring morning. I stood at the exact same spot on the manicured grass, but everything else had completely changed. The imposing wrought iron gates that once locked me out in the rain were permanently dismantled and sold for scrap metal. In their place stood wide-open, welcoming glass doors. The massive brick mansion that Marcus and Valerie used as a fortress of fake superiority had been gutted and reborn. Today was the grand opening ceremony. I stood behind a thick red ribbon holding a pair of oversized ceremonial golden scissors. Surrounding me was a massive crowd, but it was not the judgmental society that used to hover around my parents. The lawn was packed with news crews, cheering community leaders, social workers, and the brilliant medical staff I personally hired. My husband stood right by my side, holding my hand with that same unwavering pride. The property was officially rechristened as the Sterling Sanctuary for Women. I invested millions to transform the site of my greatest trauma into a fully funded transition home and free medical clinic. We designed the facility to serve young Black women who had been disowned, financially cut off, or abused by toxic families. I created the exact safe haven I desperately needed 6 years ago when I was starving and sleeping in the back of a bus terminal. Marcus and Valerie built this estate on systemic lies, crushing debt, and betrayal. They worshiped the hollow approval of wealthy white elites like Richard and Preston, sacrificing their own flesh and blood just to maintain a fragile illusion of status. Their empire collapsed under federal indictments, leaving them with absolutely nothing. I took the physical ruins of their colossal failure and rebuilt it on a foundation of absolute integrity and unconditional support. The very dining room where they used to host lavish, pretentious galas, funded by dirty laundered money, was now a pristine community cafeteria, providing hot, nutritious meals to women getting back on their feet. The master suite where my mother hoarded designer gowns was converted into a mental health counseling center. During the construction process, I even saw Evelyn Carter and her snobby friends drive slowly past the estate in their luxury cars, glaring through the windows. They were absolutely sickened to see their exclusive high society neighborhood permanently transformed into a beacon of public healing, but there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop my untouchable power. The mayor stepped up to the podium, delivering a powerful speech about my dedication to the community. He handed the microphone over to me. I looked out at the sea of supportive faces. I did not mention Marcus or Valerie. I did not mention Dominique sitting in a federal prison cell. They no longer held any power over my narrative. They were completely erased from my story. I spoke directly to the young women standing in the front row who were already benefiting from the sanctuary programs. I told them that their worth is never determined by the people who abandon them. I told them that surviving toxic family abuse does not just make you resilient, it makes you entirely unstoppable. The crowd erupted into deafening applause as I brought the golden scissors together, cleanly slicing through the thick red ribbon. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment of total, absolute victory. The heavy burden I had carried for 6 long years finally lifted completely off my shoulders. After the press conference concluded and the guests began filtering into the reception area, I took a quiet moment for myself. I slipped my chief of surgery white coat over my tailored dress, feeling the familiar comforting weight of the embroidered fabric. I walked slowly through the brightly lit hallways of the clinic. The walls were painted in soothing, warm tones, replacing the cold, oppressive aesthetic my mother had obsessively curated. Nurses and doctors greeted me warmly as I passed, their voices filled with genuine respect and admiration. I reached the central atrium, pausing in front of a large, polished wall. Where a massive, pretentious portrait of my biological family used to hang there was now a beautiful, solid gold plaque catching the natural light pouring in from the skylight. I stepped closer, reading the engraved words. It did not bear the names of the people who shared my DNA. It was dedicated to my husband, whose unwavering love showed me what true partnership actually means. It was dedicated to the brilliant medical colleagues who supported me when I had absolutely nothing. It was dedicated to my beautiful chosen family. I reached out and gently traced the engraved letters on the cold metal surface. I thought about the terrified, broke medical student who was thrown out into the freezing night with absolutely nowhere to go. I thought about the years of grueling, exhaustive work required to build my career from the ground up, while my sister wore designer clothes, bought with my stolen trust fund. Every single moment of suffering, every tear, every late-night shift had led directly to this exact, undeniable triumph. I did not just survive their malicious betrayal, I completely conquered it. I turned away from the glowing gold plaque, adjusting the stiff collar of my crisp, white medical coat. I walked confidently down the pristine hospital corridor, the rhythmic sound of my footsteps echoing with absolute authority. My future was brilliantly bright and entirely my own creation. The dark, toxic ghosts of my past were permanently banished from these beautiful halls. I was no longer a helpless, vulnerable victim trapped. I was no longer a discarded daughter begging for scraps of conditional love. I was a phenomenally successful woman, surrounded by genuine respect, operating at the absolute pinnacle of my chosen medical profession. I had finally achieved total untouchable vindication, immense, undeniable success, and finally I had truly found absolute perfect peace. This journey powerfully demonstrates that true worth is never defined by toxic family members who demand blind loyalty while offering nothing but betrayal. When faced with ultimate disrespect and abandonment, an unshakable integrity becomes your greatest weapon. It proves that you do not have to accept abuse disguised as familial duty. By legally and emotionally severing ties with those who exploit you, you can transform the deepest trauma into a sanctuary for others. The ultimate revenge is always massive, undeniable success. Always remember to fiercely protect your boundaries and never let anyone diminish your value. Please like and subscribe today.